Chapter 3, The Will of God. God's Will. That is a most intriguing and mysterious subject. On one hand, the scripture says in 2 Peter 3rd chapter 9th verse that God is not willing that anyone should perish. If God desires that everyone should be saved, who can stop him? If he is omnipotent, no one can question him. If he saves everyone in the world, then what is holding him back? On the other hand, Paul tells us in Romans 9 chapter 22 verse that God has made some people the objects of his wrath, prepared for destruction. How can a merciful God create some people to bear his wrath? This question is a difficult one. Many preachers have tried to explain this, but the students and the critics are not satisfied with the answers. If God made some people to be objects of his wrath and others to be objects of his mercy, where is God's justice? I am not trying here to explain the doctrine of predestination and foreordination. I have already written a small book, The God of Jacob, that explains that mystery. Those who are interested to know the injustice in God's predestination should read that book. But here we are discussing whether there is a 100% guarantee that God's will shall be fulfilled under any circumstances. Do certain things in the universe happen? Like some people go into hell against God's desire and will. But if many things occur, even if God does not want them to happen, how can we believe that He all powerful? In this chapter, we will find the answer to this question. A lot of unfortunate and undesirable incidents happened in the history of the world, beginning with one of the beloved sons of God corrupting himself and becoming Satan. Many other undesirable incidents followed that fall of Satan. These are all events that we do not like and we wish they had never happened. Millions of angels have fallen into eternal destruction. The human race, which God created in His image, fell into sin. Did all these incidents take place according to God's will? Or should we assume that God could not stop those sad events even though He did not want them to happen? Yet, how can God be honored and revered as the King of Kings if such horrible events could happen against His desire and will? Those who think along those lines must understand a most important truth. There are actually two spheres in the will of God. The first sphere is the determinate will, and the second sphere is the permissive will. First of all, as creator and ruler, God has a specific purpose that must be accomplished in the universe at any cost. He will have the ultimate result He desires. They cannot be different from what God wills and desires. God will never compromise on the final outcome. That is the determinate will. But there is an outer ring, an outer sphere of the will of God, which we call the permissive will. The permissive will accommodates and respects the functioning of other intelligence God created. It allows other wills to work. God has intelligently planned to create sons who have personality and individuality. Every created son of God has a personal will. In fact, any man or woman without a will would be a robot and not a person. So, God has decided to create individuals having a will, which includes the ability to desire and make plans to achieve that desire. But the moment there are millions of other individuals having their own will, a new problem arises in the universe. Each individual thinks, desires, and feels differently. What is the desirable in the sight of one person may be of no interest to another. What makes one person happy may not be able to please the other one. In every given situation, each individual would inevitably judge differently and desire to act differently. God has accommodated All this wills into his general plan because he is the one who created them. God thus has to allow the power of discretion in his sons to work. Otherwise, he would be unjust to his own self and to his creation. God has another responsibility too. While allowing all his created children's individualities and their wills to function, God must still be able to achieve the final results of his original plan. God can do it, and he will do it. That is why he is God. So, how can God allow everyone's discretion to be expressed and executed while sticking to his original plan, driving toward his desired goal? This is possible because of God's permissive will. That is the beauty of God's nature and character. One classic example of God's permissive will is what he did in Balaam's life. The story is recorded in Numbers 22. Initially, God commanded Balaam not to go to curse Israel, telling Balaam that he had already blessed Israel. God explained that Balaam should not curse someone whom God had already blessed. That is the determinate will of God. The children of Israel must be blessed, not cursed. Balaam too had initially obeyed God, but the prophet wanted to go anyway to curse Israel. Why? He wanted to receive the reward from King Balak. Second Peter, second chapter, 15th verse tells us he lowered the wages of wickedness. Balaam could not overcome the temptation. He wanted to become rich. So, to fulfill his desire, he decided to go and curse Israel. But he wanted to give the impression that he was obedient to God. Again and again, he told the elders of Moab that he could not curse Israel without God's permission. He said, even if Balak gave me all the silver and gold in his palace, I could not do anything great or small to go beyond the command of the Lord my God. How godly Balaam sounds. Anybody who overhears this conversation between Moabite officials and Balaam and would conclude that Balaam is a great saint who is totally obedient to God. But in the heart of his heart, Balaam loved the money he could get by disobeying God's will. Balaam wanted to ask God once again to permit him to curse Israel, but God knew the heart of his servant that Balaam had already given into the temptation of unrighteous gain. Then in verse 20, we see that night God came to Balaam and said, since this man have come to summon you, go with them, but do not only what I tell you. Initially, God told Balaam, do not go with them. Now, in verse 20, God Himself is saying, go with them. Do not go with them is the determinate will of God, and go with them is the permissive will of God. God, being Almighty, could easily stop Balaam, but desired to let Balaam do what he wanted. God desired to allow Balaam to go his way, tough it was against God's wish and will. The book of Job tells us God is mighty, but despised no one. He is mighty and firm in his purpose. God is infinitely more powerful than his sons and daughters, but he will never forcibly superimpose his will and mind on us. God wants his children to obey him voluntarily, not by force. He delights when we submit to him by our own free will. So God could have stopped Balaam by force, but he did not do that. He said, you can go, Balaam, if you want. That is the permissive will of God. As another example, let's suppose a little boy wants to go out cycling on the main road. He seeks his mother's permission, but she is not willing to let her son go out into the busy traffic. She says, no, my son, you can play at home or in the garden in our front yard. You are too small, you cannot go cycling on the road in that busy traffic. But our story doesn't stop there. The little one insists on going out. The loving mother intelligently refuses to permit the boy, but the boy is bent upon going out. Finally, the mother is fed up and says, "Alright, son, don't bother me anymore. Go and play as you like." The boy is excited that he gets to bike on the road like the grown ups. But his adventure doesn't pan out as he expected. He ends up getting in an accident and is brought back home with a fractured leg. Then, at the hospital, the nurse inquires, "Why did you go out into that heavy traffic? You should not have gone on the main road. You are too young to do that." The boy answers, "Mummy told me to go." Was the boy telling a lie? His mother really told him to go. The boy took his mother's permission. But did his mother really want him to go out into the busy traffic? Of course not. In the heart of her heart, she did not want the boy to go into the dangerous situation. But the boy would not be happy if she stopped him by force. So the mother decided to let him go and learned the hard way the importance of obeying authority. And that is sometimes the way God deals with his children. That is how God dealt with Balaam. God allows what his children want to do. Of the consequences that result are not in his original plan. He allows them as long as he knows that their actions and the resulting consequences do not hinder him from reaching his goal. One of the mighty cherubs of heaven turned against God and became Satan because of the permissive will of God. In fact, it was because of this permissive will that serpent could come into the Garden of Eden. This is the reason there is much sin in this world. If God was a dictator treating us like robots, people would have never committed any sin. All our sinful deeds are committed because God has given us free will. By this, we should not be confused into thinking that God is the root cause of all sin. We can think of free will or freedom like a knife. A knife can both cut apples, also one's throat. It is impossible to make a knife that can cut only apples, not the throats. Freedom, likewise, can be used to either obey God or to disobey Him. Freedom in which disobedience is not possible is no freedom at all. God gave us freedom and free will, and with our free will, we can intelligently decide to obey God or to disobey. Sadly, man and woman, being corrupt in their hearts and polluted in their motives, are using their freedom to disobey God. The only way we could avoid this situation is to create robots instead of man and woman with individuality. Just imagine, none of us would want to be a robot. Instead, we would want to be individuals with all the faculties of personality. And so we must be grateful to God that He gave us free will and freedom to choose our way. But there is a question arising here that is of great importance. What should we do to live a holy life in the kingdom of a God who exercises a permissive will, the best use of human will? First of all, we must have a holy intention and motive to live a holy and perfect life. The only way we can have such pure motives is to be born again into God's family and possess God's nature. Secondly, we have to submit to God's authority at every step of our life and walk in absolute obedience to Him. I know that it is very difficult as the fallen children of fallen Adam. We are more comfortable disobeying God than obeying Him, but it becomes possible for us to gladly obey God. When we have an unshakable trust in His goodness and love, we must trust that God will guide us only in the way that leads us to the greatest blessing. There can be no better way and no higher blessedness than what God offers us. We must believe this truth with all our hearts. Any person who cannot believe in God's absolute goodness cannot submit to His authority willingly. As I told you, God, our loving Father, will not force Himself upon anyone. He will not rule and guide a person who does not voluntarily submit to His authority. Without God's guidance, we can't walk properly and we end up doing all foolish deeds, which brings eternal loss and disgrace upon us. So it is clear now that the root cause of all sin is our refusal to trust God and submit to His authority. Proverbs 3rd chapter 6th verse says, "In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." Unbelief and lack of trust in God is the root cause. This is the message of the Bible. But if God is responsible for our actions, does He have the right to send anyone to hell? If the man is responsible for his own deeds, what is God doing? He is permitting, He is accessing, He is permissive will. Even while allowing the free wills of the individuals He created to function freely, God is able to work out His original plan for the ultimate blessedness of the universe. We can trust that God will achieve what He wanted to and reach the goal He fixed for Himself. That is the greatness of God. No other person in the universe is so wise, gentle, and able as God. Isn't God wonderful? Let us worship this wonderful person called God with all our hearts.